I still remember the sound of the lawyer's voice, calm, almost indifferent, as if he weren't reading the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my husband, Daniel. According to Mr. Hartman's final will, he paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the silence of that polished oak room. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the rest. My children, Ethan and Lily, were named the sole beneficiaries. Every penny, every asset, the house, the stocks, even the vineyard Daniel and I had built together from the ground up. Not a single line mentioned my name. For a moment I thought it was a mistake, a cruel clerical error. But when I glanced across the table, the lawyer wouldn't meet my eyes. And the children, my children, sat in stunned silence, their faces pale and unreadable. How could he? I whispered. The words tasted like betrayal. Daniel had always been the center of our lives, a man both admired and feared, his presence commanding attention wherever he went. He was charismatic in that effortless way that made people trust him, even when they shouldn't. I used to joke that he could talk a storm into calming down. But in the end, I realized I never truly understood him at all. Now, sitting in that suffocating office, I couldn't help replaying the last few months of his life. The sudden illness that took him. The way he grew distant, as if he were guarding something too heavy to share. I had brushed it off as exhaustion, maybe denial about his declining health. But deep down, a small voice had whispered that something wasn't right. I never imagined the truth would come in the form of a will. After the reading, Ethan wouldn't look at me. Lily tried to speak, something soft, something apologetic, but the words crumbled before they could form. They were just as blindsided, I told myself, just as confused. Yet a hollow ache began to form in my chest. A mother knows when there's something more beneath her children's silence. As we left the law office, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble steps. It should have been comforting, the warmth, the familiarity, but everything felt foreign, as if I were stepping out of my own life and into someone else's. Daniel's face lingered in my mind, that knowing smile, that infuriating calmness even in chaos. What had he been planning all along? The answer, I suspected, wouldn't just explain the will. It would unravel the very foundation of the life I thought we'd built together. And as much as I wanted to hate him for it, a part of me couldn't help but wonder, was this his final way of telling me something I refused to see when he was alive? I met Daniel Hartman 22 years ago in the least romantic place imaginable, a hospital corridor. He was visiting his father. I was a young nurse barely making ends meet. He'd been leaning against a vending machine, sleeves rolled up, a tie undone, looking like a man both exhausted and charmingly out of place. When our eyes met, he smiled in that slow, confident way that made time hesitate for just a second. I never stood a chance. He pursued me with quiet persistence, flowers on night shifts, coffee runs that turned into late-night talks about dreams, family, and everything in between. Daniel had a vision for his life. He wanted to build something that would outlive him. I admired that drive, that hunger for more. What I didn't realize then was how consuming that ambition could become. We married within a year, built our home on a hill overlooking the vineyard that became both our livelihood and our sanctuary. Ethan came first, then Lily 3 years later. My world revolved around them, their laughter echoing through the halls, their muddy footprints trailing through the kitchen, their tiny hands reaching for mine. Daniel was a devoted father, at least on the surface. He adored them, spoiled them, taught them how to stand tall and never settle for less. But as the years went by, I noticed his affection came with a quiet distance. He'd disappear for business trips lasting weeks, sometimes months. Asked questions at first, then stopped when I realized how easily he could make me doubt myself. He had a way of speaking that turned every concern into an overreaction. "You worry too much, Claire," he'd say, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "You should trust me by now." I did. At least, I wanted to. The last year of his life was a blur of hospital visits, hushed phone calls, and paperwork I never saw. He grew thinner, weaker, but his mind stayed sharp. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at Ethan and Lily with a strange mix of pride and regret. When I asked what was wrong, He'd smile faintly and say, "They'll understand someday." At the time, I thought he was talking about death, about letting go. I didn't realize he meant me. Now, standing in the echo of his decisions, I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel had orchestrated something far greater than a mere inheritance. The vineyard, the accounts, the will, it all felt deliberate, almost like a final lesson meant for me, not them. And yet, what lesson could possibly justify erasing me from his life on paper? That night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table where we once planned our future, I noticed the envelope. My name written in Daniel's familiar handwriting, resting beside the fruit bowl. I don't know how I'd missed it before. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Maybe, just maybe, it held the beginning of the truth. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Thick, deliberate, the kind of paper Daniel only used for business contracts or personal letters that mattered. My fingers hesitated at the seal. I wanted to open it, but a part of me was terrified of what it might say. When I finally did, the first line hit me like a storm. "If you're reading this, Claire, then I'm already gone. And I know you're angry. But please, before you hate me, finish this letter." I read on, each word cutting deeper than the last. Daniel spoke of love, of regret, of choices he couldn't undo. But between the tender lines, there were fragments of something darker, cryptic references to what was owed, to promises made before we met. I read the letter 3 times before I even realized I was crying. Whatever Daniel had done, whatever he was trying to fix with that will, it wasn't just about money. It was about something that started long before our marriage. I barely slept that night. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories too loud to silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the curtains, it all carried his voice. The next morning, I found Ethan in the study, his back turned, the will spread open across the desk like a map of betrayal. "Why didn't he leave you anything?" he asked quietly, without looking up. His tone wasn't accusing, just lost. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe he thought this was the best way to." "To what?" "Teach us a lesson." He turned then, his jaw tight, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You built this place with him. You were there before he even had a name anyone knew. And now you're just erased?" Lily entered behind him, holding a cup of tea that trembled slightly in her hands. "Mom, maybe there's a reason," she said. "Dad wouldn't do this to hurt you. He wasn't cruel." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the more I thought about Daniel's secrets, the trips, the calls, the way he'd grown distant, the harder it was to defend him. Later that afternoon, I went to the vineyard alone. The vines were bare this time of year, twisted and leafless, stretching toward a gray sky. I walked between the rows, my boots sinking into the damp soil, and thought about all the times Daniel had walked this same path with Ethan on his shoulders or Lily clutching his hand. That was when I saw it, a figure near the old storage shed. A man in a dark coat, standing too still, as if waiting. My heart lurched. When he noticed me, he didn't move away. Instead, he nodded once and began walking toward me. As he got closer, recognition hit like ice. "Mr. Whitmore?" I breathed. He had been Daniel's lawyer for nearly a decade, trusted, discreet, always lurking at the edges of our family gatherings with polite smiles and unreadable eyes. "Mrs. Hartman," he greeted softly. "I was hoping we'd speak privately." I folded my arms. "About what?" He hesitated. "Your husband left more than one letter. The one you found was meant for you. The other was meant for me. And in it, he asked me to give you something, but only when you were ready." "Ready for what?" He reached into his coat and handed me a small black notebook bound in leather. It was worn, familiar, Daniel's handwriting scrawled across the cover. "Everything he couldn't say," Whitmore murmured. "It's all in there." I stared at it, feeling my pulse thundering in my ears. When I opened the first page, the date at the top made my stomach twist. It was from before our marriage. Whatever Daniel had been hiding, it had begun long before he became my husband. And if the letter had shaken me, I had a feeling this notebook would destroy me. I sat at the kitchen table again, the same place I had read his first letter, The same place I'd once watched him pour morning coffee and hum under his breath like life was simple. The notebook lay open before me, its pages yellowed around the edges, smelling faintly of cedar and wine. At first, the entries were businesslike, notes about land purchases, supply deals, and expansion plans. But as the weeks and months passed, his tone changed. The sentences grew personal, confessional. He wrote about guilt, about debts that couldn't be repaid with money. And then, halfway through the notebook, I found the entry that made my breath catch. If anything ever happens to me, Claire must never find out the truth about the vineyard, or about where the first investment came from. My heart dropped. He wrote about a woman named Margaret Weller, someone I had never heard of. According to Daniel, she had loaned him a large sum of money to start his first business, with one condition, that if he ever failed to repay her, her family would have a claim on his estate. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part came in the next entry, dated just weeks before our wedding. I repaid Margaret years later. Or at least I thought I did. But the truth is harder. The boy she left behind, Ethan, is mine. The words blurred. My hands trembled so violently I had to press the notebook flat against the table just to keep reading. Claire loves him like her own, and I have never found the courage to tell her the truth. How could I? She made us a family. She made me a man worthy of it. But if this secret dies with me, it will find another way to surface, and it will hurt them all. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Ethan, my son, the child I had raised, loved, protected, wasn't mine by blood. And Daniel had known. All these years, every time he looked at me with that heavy silence, every time he hesitated before saying our son, this was the truth he was holding back. I could hear the echo of Ethan's words from the day before. You were there before he even had a name anyone knew. And now you're just erased. Now, I understood. The will wasn't meant to punish me. It was meant to protect Ethan. Daniel had left everything to him and Lily not out of cruelty, but out of guilt, love, and fear. He wanted to make sure Ethan's future was secured, even if the truth about his past destroyed the rest of us. My tears came hot and relentless. Memories flashed through my mind. Ethan's first steps, his laughter when Daniel swung him onto his shoulders, the way he'd cried when his father died. Every one of those moments was real. Blood couldn't rewrite that. But I couldn't unhear it either. When I finally told Lily, she didn't speak for a long time. She just stared out the window, her reflection pale against the glass. He must have been terrified, she whispered. Dad, living with that secret every day. And Ethan? I asked, my voice breaking. What do I tell him? She turned to me then, eyes glistening. The truth. Because no matter what that notebook says, you're still his mother. You're the only one who ever was. Outside, the sun dipped low behind the vines, the light bleeding gold over the earth. For the first time since Daniel's death, I didn't feel anger. Just a hollow, aching kind of understanding. Daniel's will wasn't a betrayal. It was his confession. And the notebook, the truth, was the price of love he couldn't bring himself to speak aloud. I waited 3 days before showing Ethan the notebook. 3 days of pacing the house, rereading Daniel's words until they burned into my mind. Every instinct in me wanted to protect him from it, from the truth that could tear down the identity he'd carried all his life. But I knew I couldn't. Secrets had already done enough damage. When I finally called him to the kitchen, his expression was wary, guarded. I slid the notebook across the table. Your father left this for us, I said softly. He looked at it for a long time before opening the first page. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just watched as his eyes moved from line to line, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to something deeper, something raw and wordless. When he reached the entry that mattered, he closed the notebook slowly and pressed his hands against his face. I always felt it, he whispered. I never said it out loud, but sometimes I thought maybe Dad looked at me differently. Not in a bad way. Just like he owed me something. He looked up at me then, eyes rimmed red. But you never did. You just loved me. I reached across the table and took his hand. Because you're my son, I said. That's not something blood can change. Lily stood in the doorway, silent but steady, and for the first time in months, we were together again. Not as a family shaped by inheritance or secrets, but as three people finally allowed to be honest. After Ethan went upstairs, I stayed by the window, watching the vineyards stretch out beneath the evening sky. The land looked different now, less like Daniel's empire and more like a legacy none of us fully understood until it was almost gone. I thought about him then, about the choices he made, the lies he carried, the love that tried to make amends too late. Maybe he hadn't known how to ask for forgiveness. Maybe this, his will, his letters, his silence, was his way of giving it. I'll never know if he found peace in the end. But as I watched the light fade across the vines, I realized something. Forgiveness isn't always spoken. Sometimes it's felt, in the quiet moments after the truth, when anger gives way to understanding. And that night, for the first time since Daniel died, I whispered into the stillness, "I forgive you,